So getting into our panel today, as I mentioned, we've got three Scottish companies who were, one is a startup through to a fairly mature company, coming at mobility from different angles. A couple of them are within mobility fairly obviously, and one not so much. So let me introduce, jump to the next slide. Piers Glennie, co-founder of Ember, Eifion Roberts, co-founder of Bounc-e, and of course we've got Gavin Neat of Neatebox. Welcome, gentlemen. Let me bring you all on board here. Eifion, where are you?
There you
go. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, gentlemen. Really appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
I think the way we might structure this today is we'll start off having each of you to sort of explain yourselves and your background, and digging into what exactly your company is. I'm sure our audience would like to hear sort of the background of how you got where you are, and what exactly you're doing today. So yeah, please take some time to do that. Piers, would you like to start off?
Sure. Thanks for the intro, Dan, and thanks for organising the event. So I'm Piers. I'm one of the co-founders of Ember, and Ember is the world's first 100% electric long-distance bus operator. So I launched Ember with my co-founder Keith. We launched our first service in last October. It's not the best time to launch during COVID, but a kind of interesting opportunity to get started. And we'd been working on the company for about a year before that. Both Keith and I, our background was in tech. We'd been working at a fintech company in London together. So we kind of came at this with no transport experience, no mobility experience, to use the kind of jargon. And I think it was kind of an interesting shift, because in fintech, what we had been doing is really going up against kind of established banks which hadn't embraced technology and were not particularly customer centric. I think we saw something quite similar in the bus industry and the transport industry. It just hadn't kept up with technological change, and that's where we felt there was a sort of an opportunity there. Just to give you kind of one example of this, there's still loads of buses out there that don't have proper live GPS tracking. So if I'm waiting for my bus and I kind of check on my phone, there's just no information about it. And if you compare that to something like Uber, where every single taxi, every car has sort of live tracking and you can see it moving towards you, that's kind of just not good enough. And these buses, they cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. It's not a complicated thing to add GPS, but it does require sort of tech to be embedded, I guess, in the organization. And even where you've seen this in the bus industry, it's often just not been implemented very well. So things are 2 minutes out of date, or you're standing at your bus stop and it tells you your bus is there and it's not there. So that was kind of one angle of where we felt that the sort of public transport, and specifically the bus industry, I guess needed some change, and there was some opportunity there coming from a tech background. And then the second angle of why we went into this is around reducing emissions and electrification. So if you look at the UK, almost all the emissions reduction over the past sort of 20 years has been due to the cleaning of electricity. So basically the rise of renewables, the shift away from coal. The emissions from transport have barely changed at all. It's pretty much flatlined. There's been more efficient cars, but at the same time, people have moved to bigger cars, which kind of neutralize that. There's something like 2% of buses are electric. It's still very, very small. There's not been a massive change in railways electrification. So yeah, if you look at a kind of goal like 2045 or 2050, and you're saying we need to be at zero by then, and that's zero across absolutely everything, then the rate of change in transport at the moment is just not good enough. It needs to kind of get much, much more rapid. And I think the other angle there is that we felt that the technology already existed for a lot of that change to happen today, but people were not embracing it fast enough. They were looking at it in the same way they look at diesel or petrol, And that meant they weren't necessarily seeing the commercial opportunities. They were just seeing this as a sort of additional cost or a hassle or potentially a PR opportunity, not as a way that business should be done all the time. Specifically around long distance buses, we decided to go into that market because no one was talking about electrifying long distance buses. Everyone would just look at electric vehicles and say, my bus does 500 miles a day. There's no way that can go electric. The range isn't good enough. And we sort of wanted to challenge that and say, actually, if you plan the operations and you have the right technology, you can do that by using things like smart charging throughout the day to really make the most of electric vehicles. And not only that, but if you manage to replace your long distance diesel bus with an electric bus, your fuel saving will be much, much bigger there because you're using so much fuel because you're driving so far. So practically, we launched our first service from Dundee to Edinburgh last October. We're running with 2 buses, and each of these buses is averaging over 800 kilometers per day. We're pretty sure these are the highest mileage electric vehicles in the world. We're already at about 150,000 kilometers per bus just since October. And we get this mileage by having an ultra-fast charger located in central Dundee. Every single time we get back to Dundee, we're plugging it in, charging at full speed, letting passengers on, letting drivers take a break, and then heading out again. And that kind of sounds simple, and in some ways it is, but it's quite a shift in the mentality from a traditional bus operator. So a traditional bus operator has a depot. Often the depot is kind of quite far out of town or not particularly accessible. You would never have passengers go to your depot. And that depot probably doesn't have a high power electricity connection. It takes quite a long time to sort of get all these things worked out. And then their timetables, which often don't change for sort of years at a time, the timetables don't have any time built into them for things like charging. And then the final thing that we're doing kind of differently is we have tracking of every single charging session, the battery at every single day. We can compare battery usage to wind conditions. So yesterday, for instance, we used much more battery than we'll use today because the wind was stronger yesterday. And with all of that planning, we can get really, really precise at making sure we have the vehicles available for every route, but also not leaving loads of slack time. So we are actually getting the most out of those vehicles. The result of this is that we're saving about 500 liters of diesel per day just between 2 vehicles, about 200,000 liters per year. And also we're offering a great passenger service. So it's the only zero emission public transport from Dundee to Edinburgh. It's also the most affordable thing. We think electric vehicles can actually reduce costs of public transport and make it competitive with cars. We offer things like free cancellation, comfortable seats, lots of legroom, USB charging, bike spaces. Electric vehicles don't have to be a kind of second best option. Passengers actually prefer them. We've got fast Wi-Fi and live tracking, all for free. So yeah, that's a sort of summary of what we're offering today. The next steps for Ember, we really want to sort of expand our routes across Scotland, build a route network. So we've received some funding to help us get another 10 buses over the next year or so. That's Scottish government funding. So that's a sort of key reason in a way that we've been in Scotland, is that kind of the funding mechanism is much stronger in Scotland. It also doesn't subsidize diesel in the same way that diesel is subsidized for bus operators in England. We are building out a charging network. So this charging network is what we need to run our own services across the country. Every other bus operator is typically looking at just installing chargers in their home depot. So they can't run services sort of across the country. It's quite a different thing. And then we're looking to make these chargers available to other bus operators, coach operators, let's say a tour coach or something. A tour coach can't get into any existing car charging infrastructure. So that needs to exist in the future, and they need guaranteed availability, high-speed charging, and so on. And with these new buses, we're going to be increasing the frequency on our Dundee to Edinburgh service, as well as launching some new routes across Scotland. That includes across to Glasgow, up to Fort William, down to Dunbar. So we've got quite a lot of ambitions there. And then finally, we're just going to keep on working on improving the customer experience, taking a kind of tech-led perspective on this. Really, things like connecting our buses with other transport. So at the final mile, imagine you get into Dundee and you can seamlessly just transition to a bike share, for instance, with the new electric bikes in Dundee. Or you can switch to another bus operator or switch to the tram, and they can all be on one ticket. So that's something we're going to spend quite a lot of time over the coming year on. Yeah, so that's a kind of summary. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Piers. That was yeah, really interesting. I guess we're all here to learn, so that's good. Maybe Eifion, do you want to have a go next and tell us a little bit about Bounc-e?
Okay, thanks Dan, and thanks everybody for attending. So Bounc-e is a new startup. We're looking to sell, lease, and hire electric vehicles with a car club and subscription service planned for the future. We're a group of people with expertise in the generation of electricity, the transmission of infrastructure, and then myself, who's been based in or around the motor retailing industry since 2004, working in various locations up and down the UK, and to working for both the retailer network and manufacturers. And then the last kind of 5 years I've been spent in kind of consulting, and that's been focused around sales operations, the future of modern retailing, the current models in terms of how dealerships are structured, and what that picture will look like in the future. A lot of the work has been in the Asia Pacifics, because obviously they're changing very quickly, because again, their industry is probably not as mature as ours is. So it's been interesting to see what they've been planning moving forward. In terms of the generation and electricity and the transmission infrastructure, so our seed company, which is a company called Blackthorn-Powys, is based around renewable energy up and down the UK, but specifically in Scotland. And it's all about whether it's wind turbines, whether it's hydro generation, it's all about the renewable electricity. So what we've done is we've pulled our resources and our expertise to focus on what we think is probably the single greatest opportunity for the sale of a product in our lifetime. So we're in the process of assembling a shop front where every willing manufacturer is available, and any willing customer, be that retail, business, or public sector, will be able to get everything they need from EVs. Obviously, we'll be supported by an app, which will have, again, lots of exciting features like Piers has been talking about, including kind of live tracking, mapping, surge pricing, all of this kind of good stuff, and also looking at a model where it's not a return to base kind of car club. It's also available for one-way travel. So some quite innovative things. In addition to that, we're also making a bit of a break from the norm. So we're not just selling the cars and saying thank you very much and saying goodbye to our customers. We're also looking to offer both domestic and commercial charging infrastructure. So taking away the worry of who do I get my power charger from, where do I want it put, how many chargers do I need for my fleet of vehicles. We'll kind of take all of that on board and basically provide the solution for you. We'll look into connections and all that kind of stuff to make sure that it's all feasible at your location, and also tailor the kind of charger as best we can to what your needs and demands are in terms of your kind of domestic charging. We see the next 5 years as pretty crucial to our business, and feel that as an independent, we kind of have a bit of an advantage over both the manufacturers and probably the retail networks. So EVs are very much like mobile phones were in the 1990s. So it's moving very quickly, but there's limited sources of information. So in the olden days, you used to go to a shop and they'd have 6 phones and there'd be 3 or 4 different plans, and you just had to pick one. But then as time went on, you had the birth of kind of Car Phone Warehouse and the phones for you. So all of a sudden you could go to a shop and they had all the phones, and all of a sudden they had all the plans. and therefore you could pick exactly what you wanted. That's exactly what we're looking to try and be, but for EVs. So we kind of take away basically the natural hierarchy hasn't been formed, so it gives this kind of innovation the opportunity to kind of positively disrupt the traditional kind of retail model. And again, if you look at all the new entrants into the market, so your likes of your Teslas, Rivian and Ineos, when they come along, they're also looking to challenge that model, because they're looking for a high traffic retail model rather than the traditional dealership model. And again, a lot of their sales are actually moving online. So again, that's exactly what we're looking to try and do. So in terms of our key aims, we want to take the fear and the hard work out of the process of transitioning to an EV for both retail, public and private sectors. So that's our goal.
Fantastic. Sounds like basically it's a turnkey EV solution for pretty much anyone.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. Great. Next up, Gavin, tell us a little bit about Neatebox and your background and how you got here.
Yeah, an absolute pleasure. Great listening to the guys. I'm just interested, they're all our profile photographs for these guys who have got really short hair and look very smart. And then all of a sudden there's some of us have put on hair. I've put on, it appears, about 5 years of age as well from my profile picture. So I'm going to have to update that. Anyway, a little bit about me. We're talking about here about hardware and we're talking about software. I'm more about the soft squidgyware, which is the individual who gets inside the EV, the human involved. And I think sometimes we can leave the human out a little bit. We talk a lot about the vehicles, how we design things and how we put things into practice. But ultimately, without the people to move from A to B, we're not actually going to be. We don't have a service, and the guys know this, and everybody knows that. But my focus has always been around the people, and there's a very good reason for that. I used to work for Guide Dogs for the Blind. I was a guide dog mobility instructor. I trained people how to use guide dogs, which is kind of weird. But mobility was my trade. In fact, this is me here. I'm holding up a book. There's a picture on the back of the book of me training a guide dog, and I'm standing in between a person and a pedestrian crossing and pointing out how far away the person is from the actual button and the pole. And Murray, who's the chap with the guide dog, gets to the down curb and then can't press the button because it's too far away. And then there's a photograph inside here of a gent who can't reach the button on a pedestrian crossing at all. He just can't cross the road independently. And these are designs that have been put into practice, into our infrastructure to help people get from A to B. And there's a very good reason to bring that up well, there's two good reasons. One, because back in 2011, while I was working for Guide Dogs for the Blind, I invented the world's first pedestrian crossing operated by smartphones because of that problem. So next to crossing, phone presses button at crossing. It's the simplest thing in the world, but it's only seen because I was the person who was following the blind person everywhere and going, oh my God, they can't cross the road. So when you add the person into the problem, or into the solution even, unless the person is a very, very serious part of the solution, the end solution doesn't fit what they need. And if we talk about what people need, and people notice there's a pedestrian crossing behind me, that is the first one that was operated by smartphones. But unless we actually take into consideration the needs of the person, we end up with a solution that potentially hasn't benefited them. Now, if we just talk about people for a second, obviously my background is disability. I did it for 18 years. I'm now CEO of Neatebox. The first thing I did was a pedestrian crossing, but that was a great example of a person using a mobility aid and not being able to cross a road because the design didn't work. If we do that with EVs as an example, and we can talk about any form of transport, if we do it with trains or whatever it might be, and we don't take into consideration the needs of the user, it's not going to work. Now let's have a look at those users for a second. Well, every single person who's watching this right now is part of one of the most powerful and growing minorities in the world. They might not be it today, but they're going to be it within the next 50, 60 years. Disabled people are generally elderly people, majority are. All of us who are watching this are going to be elderly, we hope. There's a very good chance that most of us will be disabled. There are two types of people who are disabled and people who die very quickly. The person who dies very quickly doesn't go on to become disabled. The person who lives a long time is going to have hearing impairment, visual impairment, mobility impairments. And they're the people that we're designing solutions for today. So my company helps come up with those solutions and make sure that the rest of society goes, oh, wait a second, yeah, disability is definitely a part of this. The work that I do right now is on an app called Welcome. Welcome is part of the mobility solution. The mobility solution isn't just about how you get from A to B, it's what happens when you get to B. Indeed, it's how the person collects you from A, if they're collecting you. So Welcome is a system that, well, imagine ordering a taxi. When you order the taxi and the taxi's 3 minutes from the house, you get a message that says the taxi's 3 minutes away. Well, that gives us the opportunity to let somebody know when the taxi's outside. Whereas if we switch that around and we say, I'm a disabled person and I'm going to a bus depot, the people in the bus depot could know when I'm 3 minutes away from the bus depot, or indeed one of Pierce's buses. If you know 3 minutes before a disabled person gets to your bus that they're disabled and they need to be dealt with in a certain way, then you as a bus driver, or indeed the conductor, if there is going to be such a thing, will know how to interact with that person. Whether they've got a mobility aid, whether they're going to need support, whether they have autism, whether they need music turned down, whether they need different color coordination, whether they need all these things we can learn before we get there, and that's what Welcome is, and that's what I do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much there. So, Gavin, just sorry, I'm going to start with you that you've just finished talking, so we'll just follow on with the conversation there. So, are you effectively sort of saying as well that there's a missed opportunity from a business perspective, potentially in mobility and beyond, with regard to addressing some of these needs? I guess I'm asking, are the challenges faced by the elderly and the disabled population limiting them from actually utilizing these services? I think the answer is obvious, but it's good to get your explanation.
Totally. However, the big guys are putting this into practice. So we've got contract with Welcome, which lets you know when somebody's arriving somewhere. We've got contracts with Northlink ferries. Every single Northlink ferry terminal has Welcome. So a disabled person can train somebody how to interact with them before they get to the terminal. But that was Northlink ferries who went looking for solutions. The challenge we have when we're starting out with solutions, and I love what the guys are doing and have done, it's amazing, and I know because I've been there the last few years, but is how do you build that stuff in at the very start? How do we and Scotland's got the most amazing entrepreneurs, it really does, and we've got fantastic ability to use Scottish Edge and Scottish Enterprise and the like, but how do we make sure that the people who have the ideas also have an understanding of who they need to design for? Because retrofitting solutions for this part of the population is a nightmare. It's bloody expensive. If we're going to try and make a bus more accessible, if we're going to make a car more accessible, make communication within these things more accessible, we need to make sure it's put into the design process. So it couldn't be more important, to tell you the truth. Aging population, it could not be more important.
So do you have an idea economically of, I mean, what proportion of the market, just very generally and broadly, is that we're potentially missing out on?
Well,
do you have any idea around numbers?
20%. Yeah, 20% of the world's population, 1.3 billion people, are disabled or living with a disability. 80% of disabled people, and there's 14.1 million disabled people in the UK, 80% of that number have hidden conditions. People think of disability and access as being wheelchair user, guide dog owner, but 80% of people who are disabled have hidden conditions: autistic, acquired brain injury, aphasia, ataxia, epilepsy, dyslexia, stammer. All of these things are things that we wouldn't necessarily connect with disability. We connect with disability, and it's disability's fault to a certain extent, with a wheelchair that we paint onto car parking spaces. We go, yeah, okay, disabled person, wheelchair user. It's only 4% of the world's population use wheelchairs. It's tiny in comparison to the 1.3 billion. So if we also look at spending power, so you look at spending power for disabled people worldwide, it's 8 trillion a year. In the UK, it's 274 billion pounds a year for that 20%. Now, that's just the people who are disabled. If you look at the family and friends, if you look at, I pick on bus journeys again, but I would normally say a restaurant. If you look at a restaurant that's inaccessible, or a group of people that are wanting to go to a restaurant, and one member of that family, or indeed Christmas function, is a wheelchair user, if that building is not accessible, everybody goes somewhere else. So it's not just about losing the money the disabled person would spend, it's losing the money that the people with them would spend. But also, and you'll notice not the last Super Bowl, but the year before, right in the middle, the most expensive advert in the entire Super Bowl was Microsoft saying, here's a controller for your Xbox that is for disabled people. They spent millions on that because they recognize that it's not just about providing a service and who needs a service, it's also telling the world that you're the sort of company that actually will provide those services. And they recognize that there's money and PR in that. They're not cynical. No big business is ever cynical, for sure. They're doing it because they know that the people are actually more inclined to want to look at their company if they are a human company, sustainable human company. I'll shut up now.
Fantastic. No, that's really interesting, and as you say, it's kind of something that I guess a lot of people aren't really aware of or visible. But sort of jumping back to the, one of the core reasons we're all here, I'm intrigued as to I mean, nice easy question to start with, but why Scotland? I think Pierce, you kind of touched on some of the motivators that brought you here if you weren't already, but could you dig into that a little bit, and I'll ask the same of the other panelists.
Sure. So yeah, one key reason is I was living here, and I'd previously been living in London, and I wanted a change. And I think people know the benefits of being out of London and being somewhere a bit more green and stuff. And that's actually, I think, a really important motivator for loads of businesses. Like, businesses get started where people want to start a business. The kind of second factor, just the sort of basics, was it was practical, it was the right market in terms of thing. There's maybe a bunch of countries out there that could have been the right market, but it ticked all the sort of basic boxes of having the right type of routes, the right type of sort of deregulated market that allowed a new entrant, and that kind of thing. And then I think the third, and probably the sort of the most unique thing, was the level of government support and the level of government commitment to net zero that was well ahead of certainly England in terms of the bus sector. It was also well ahead of a lot of countries in Europe, if we'd considered going there, well ahead of America, all these kind of markets. There's kind of two angles to that. One is this 2045 commitment is earlier than many countries, earlier than most countries, but I think even more important is that a large amount of legislation actually reflects this commitment. So very specifically in the bus sector, England and Scotland used to have the same type of support for buses, which was a rebate on fuel duty. A rebate on fuel duty basically pays you more if you use more diesel. England still has that system. Scotland reformed it and changed it to be a bit distance-based with an uplift for electric vehicles. Now, England completely recognizes the problem. It's been recognized for about 5 years that this needs to change. It's just not actually got done. And now it's finally starting to move forward. But that 5 years is kind of a lost opportunity where subsidies have been going to the wrong thing. And I think that's just the benefit maybe of a smaller country, that things like that can change a bit faster. And I'm sure there's loads of examples similar to that, whether in the planning system, whether in buses, whether in traffic management, all of these things where a lot of legislation needs to change by 2045 for net zero to be achieved.
Great. So Gavin, why are you here, or were you already here? Any particular motivators to be in Scotland?
I think that the main one is that I've always wanted to be somewhere where the rugby team is in ascendance. I think that's got to be the top reason to be here. But I was born in England, left when I was 3, moved up to the northwest coast of Scotland, and lived there pretty much through my childhood, and then joined Guide while I was military, and then around Scotland, the military, then Guide Dogs to the Blind. That was in Forfar. That led me through to Edinburgh. I'm a total accidental businessman, no intention of having a business, so didn't choose Scotland as a place to run a business. I just happened to be here. That said, looking back, it's been truly fantastic. Business Gateway, Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Edge, loads of people, there's so many different groups of people and entrepreneurs all working in the tech sector. And I think it's probably one of the best areas to work in social good. Ours is a high growth company, but it's a social good company. And I think that we're not swallowed up by just too much noise up here. I think in Edinburgh, it's been very easy for us to be heard, even as somebody that's doing something brand new. In London, we wouldn't get heard at all. Nobody's really heard of social good as a high growth company sort of model. So I think Scotland's been great for us in that respect, and we're now getting a lot of international interest. And I like the idea that we're Scottish, and I like the idea that this is our epicenter.
Got it. So just maybe digging into that a little bit briefly before we move on. I mean, have you ever been tempted to be elsewhere? I mean, you were making a physical device for a while there. I mean, were there sort of manufacturing reasons that made you consider other places, or is sort of all of your supply chain for everything that you're looking at actually in Scotland?
Everything's been Scotland. The manufacturing of the PCB that we put inside pedestrian crossings is all Scottish. European circuits, the guys who did all that work for us, so they were excellent. They've never really felt the need to be outside. I think the only reason for us to be moving, well, there's more because we're now an international company. We won the World Summit Awards last year for global innovation. So we're in a situation now where we've got a product that we can take elsewhere, but everything has been, all the staff, all employed, all the ones from Chile, everybody's Scottish based at this point. But the future is much, much bigger, but it's a good place to start.
Yep. No, that's fantastic. Eifion, any particular reason? I have a suspicion you didn't grow up in Scotland.
Well, no, I didn't. I have lived in the Shetlands, to be honest. So I'm Welsh, but I came to Scotland to go to university, and I've now become married. I'm married to a Scots person, and as a result, I've kind of stayed here ever since. And much the same as the other guys, you kind of, when you look at the environment in Scotland, it's not a hostile environment when it looks to both startups and green companies. So as a result, it's actually, by chance, it's a very, very appealing place to start, because even the kind of conversations, and you mentioned the noise, all the conversations that I'm having with companies, even looking at people to suppliers, they're on board straight away, and they want to be involved in something that is sustainable, is green, and that's a massive positive. And that's driven by the goals, aggressive or not. But it's, if you want to change behaviour, you've got to kind of draw a line in the sand and go, right, that's what we're aiming for. And Scotland's done that. So it makes it much more appealing for people to get, like I said, on board with our end solution.
That's really good. I'm just looking at the questions that are coming in. There's one from Charlotte Taylor. Thanks a lot for that, asking again about sort of the supply chain side of things that I queried you about, Gavin. But it'd be also to focus on talent as well. As I mentioned before, as standing up this cluster builder, I've kind of identified that there's probably some untapped talent pools out there that can definitely contribute to mobility. Be good to sort of hear what all of your experiences are so far from that perspective. Maybe we'll bounce back to you, Pierce. So just talking about talent and sort of the availability of anything else in your supply chain. I mean, maybe where do your buses come from? Would you prefer to buy them locally, and kind of how do you make that decision?
Yeah, there's a good sort of few parts, I guess, to that. So the first is to answer the buses. The buses we're using at the moment come from China. They're imported by a UK distributor in Yorkshire, who does all the sort of warranty work and stuff on them. There's a sort of interesting one. We could have bought Scottish buses. To be honest, the technology is just not there. It's just not as good. And I think that's an example where we don't want to take a kind of little Scotland approach where we have to go Scotland for the sake of doing Scotland. We want to bring the best stuff in the world to Scotland, and hopefully more stuff will be developed here. So we're completely open to buying buses in Scotland in the future. We're planning to work with a new UK-based manufacturer called Arrival that's going to be building electric buses from scratch, kind of clean sheet design. But we also just want to do the best that's out there. And I don't think there's anything that says you sort of have to get everything from one country. The second kind of part of our supply chain, I guess, is about driving and maintaining the vehicles. So it's interesting, when we first hired bus drivers, we actually had loads of applications from bus drivers who were just really keen to learn about electric vehicles. A lot of them just said to us kind of like, electric vehicles are obviously the future of my job. I've never driven an electric vehicle before. And now they're kind of super enthusiastic about figuring out how to use regenerative braking and optimize the range. And that you always see them sort of talking in a socially distanced way to other bus drivers at a bus stand, saying like, answering questions about the range, answering questions about maintenance, lifting up the bonnet and showing like there's no engine genuinely. And I think that's an area where you really do start to develop talent, where those are people who are now experienced in electric vehicles and they're not cynics about it. They understand how they can use them. It's the same with our maintenance companies. So we use a local company in Dundee who had never worked on electric vehicles before, but they've been really keen to work with the distributor in Yorkshire and learn about them. We've now got a charging point built in their facilities so that they can charge it whilst doing maintenance. And they're looking to kind of get more and more expertise on the actual high voltage system. So again, that's something where training can happen. I think people have been, they see electric vehicles as the future, so they're keen to be involved. And then I guess the final side of talent is on the sort of tech side, so particularly software engineering. And I think Edinburgh's been fairly good for that. It's quite different to the London market, which I was sort of coming to from before. It's a much smaller community that's got pros and cons. So the disadvantage is if you put a job out there, you don't get just the sort of hundreds of applications you get in London. But on the upside, I think people move around less often, and in some ways it's easier to find employees who are kind of more committed, will stay for longer, looking to get more invested and not just switch companies sort of after a year or something.
Great. So maybe Eifion, I know that, largely, I guess your acquisition comes in the form of vehicles. So, the industry isn't that significant in Scotland right now, but I also recall you're getting some web development or software development done as well. What does your supply chain look like looking forward, understanding that you're still sort of standing things up currently?
Yeah. Well, we are, like you said, we've got a national supplier. So that doesn't really take any kind of problem in terms of private sector and recruitment. That's actually, we find that the expertise in Scotland is pretty good. So when we're looking at people for our app, we started off with 4 or 5 companies, and we've kind of settled on one, which we've signed the paperwork for to help us develop our app and all that kind of stuff, because they were on the same pathway and journey, and actually they after our initial conversation, they very quickly are becoming our first customer, because they said, we're actually interested in the product that you're selling. So all of a sudden we're kind of running alongside each other, which is great. They're very much on the same page, that they understand that the way that things need to change. A couple of their directors are already on EVs, so with us talking about EVs, they understand that that's the future. So yeah, we've got great expertise from there. In terms of even the people that I've spoken to, the government, we're very early in our journey compared to the other 2 guys. So even the people that I've been speaking to in the government are very, very interested in what we're doing, and the conversations are a lot easier than I was kind of expecting. I thought it'd be like trying to push water uphill, and I just wouldn't be getting anywhere. But in actual fact, everybody wants to help. They want to arrange calls. They want to find out more about the business. So I really, the amount of interest that we've managed to generate from just what we've started off with over the last since the beginning of January is unbelievable. We've already had to revise our business plan because of the interest. And the thing that we're looking at now is about how we can scale and utilize the people that we've found since the beginning of the year. So that's how we find it.
Oh, that's fantastic. That wasn't that long ago. We've only just started the year. So
yeah,
you're rewriting business plans already.
Yeah, well, so we started off in January with this kind of project, and it was designed to be a 12-month project, and we'd work through it, and we'd follow in a very functional kind of way, and we had a very specific roadmap. But with the interest and the excitement, we've kind of brought our launch forward from kind of Q4 to kind of early Q2. So it's been pretty intense, and that's because there is a lot of interest and there is a lot of support out there that will help us push us to a point where we'll be able to launch. We won't be able to launch all our services at one point, but we'll be able to launch an element of it and then build on that from moving forward, which just gave us a kind of sustainable platform to kind of work from. But yeah, it's pretty exciting. The demand is, just on our initial figures, is probably 3 or 4 times the amount of vehicles that we were expecting. So yeah, big difference.
Oh, that's great news. So Gavin, you already touched on that you do everything locally. I mean, is there anything sort of onerous in your supply chain that maybe you'd like to do a little bit better, or improve the the conditions that you're dealing with?
We're a SaaS model company now. It's easy to get the PCBs and everything made up for the pedestrian crossing stuff, which is button. Welcome is a SaaS model company, so it's really about the software developers. We use an external agency called Passio, who have accessibility at their core, so it was very easy. But Chris, I met in Edinburgh when he was doing a project with Edinburgh Buses. My COO, Alan Hutchin, was an active travel officer with the City of Edinburgh Council before he joined my company. So he was working with the council and sort of like going, I want to do something a bit more entrepreneurial. Caro was a military in Chile before coming to the UK and wanted to do more entrepreneurial work. And she kind of saw what we were doing and went, I love the idea of working. She's got a couple of children who are disabled themselves. So she was like, wow, I love the idea of being purpose driven in a company. And I think, I wasn't going to talk about that, but our company is very much purpose driven. So we kind of like a magnet to people who are going, I want to do something different. I want to get paid well because I deserve to be paid well. And we all, if you have the skills, then you should get paid well. I want to get paid well, but I want to really make a difference. And working in green energy, working in sustainable transport, they're like magnets for people who are good quality people who just want to work in a different way. We do a 4-day working week, although the guys normally put in more hours than I could possibly pay them for or even exist. So everybody's just totally connected to the solution. And I think the workforce that we're working with, I think more and more people are looking for jobs like that and knowing that they can work from home if that's what they want to do.
Awesome. So I mean, I'm going to follow up with a question. It's a fairly generic one around challenges being faced, looking forward to 2030, sort of aligning with the climate, achieving the climate goals. But I'm particularly interested in sort of what innovations you see becoming necessary for your business in getting through to 2030 over the next 9 years now. Maybe Gavin, just follow on as well. I mean, what's over the horizon for you from an innovation and development perspective?
Well, Piers mentioned something really important, which was getting out of a bus, getting into a taxi, getting out that and getting into a train and being able to having the same ticket all the way through. It's like this utopia that we've felt we should have had a long time ago that needs to be there. We're in a situation where Welcome, our customer service system, can be used in every single venue. So you can get off the train, go into a bank, use their services, come out, go into a shop, use their services, and every single time, 2 minutes before you walk in through the door, somebody gets a message to say, Gavin's just about to arrive and needs help with this, this, and this. So I think every solution needs to be able to be connected to other solutions. That doesn't mean that Google come along and do it all, but it means that somebody goes, right, I can cherry pick through using an API or whatever it is to be able to actually link in those solutions into one big solution. I think that's got to be the future, because ultimately the customer, the consumer, doesn't want 20 different apps doing 20 different things. They want to just go, I'm going to do that. Now, Google do that incredibly well in some ways just now, but they don't have the skills to bring in the kind of companies that we've got. They might want to buy companies that we've got, but they don't have like departments working on all these things constantly and looking at new innovation constantly. They've got their eyes open, but ultimately, I think the world has to become more connected in how the solutions all operate together. And we've already got the phone, so it's all there. We just need to make it the journey easier for the actual consumer.
Great. So, I mean, as far as your business goes, though, what is there a specific next step that you're looking for, or is that just a case of sort of building an ecosystem that eventually connects up in some way, or do you have sort of specific projects in mind?
Personally, I was thinking big picture there, but I'll talk you. So for my company, we've just won the World Summit Award for in the United Nations Global Development Goals, and obviously internationally we don't exist. Nobody does this anywhere in the world, so we've already got chats with America and Israel and places like this to be able to launch in these places. Obviously, we want to be able to spread out across the whole of the UK. If you can do a bank, a coffee shop, a sports centre, a health centre, I don't know, optometrists, if you can do all of those venues, the actual opportunity is ginormous. I mean, it's just absolutely ginormous. But we'll be looking at adding in paying for something before you turn up. We'll be looking at doing it online so that it's somebody at the other end of a phone line. I mean, it's just absolutely dramatic as to how you could actually take forward our product. UK to start with, we're in Irish Rail, Northlink Ferries, Edinburgh Airport, just about to launch with our London Council. I think the future is just dramatic for this kind of stuff. So for us, oh God, it's more about how the hell do I manage to invent a couple of extra hours in the day. I think that's probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, no. It occurred to me that mobility as a service is a focal area here in Scotland as well, and sort of aligning with that concept of start to finish travel, irrespective of the modes and transitions you have to have in between, might be a really valuable parallel with what you're trying to achieve there. Maybe Eifion. Sorry, yeah, just Eifion as well. What are your innovation challenges? It sounds like you're in kind of a development growth phase anyway. Beyond the development of your app, what do you see sort of over the horizon?
Well, I think probably just looking at what we're looking at, what we've already seen in terms of demand is actually making sure that our suppliers and ourselves can kind of grow with that, and we're not missing opportunities while still providing the level of service for our end users. So that's. And we're looking at the ways that we can kind of streamline processes, automate processes, all that kind of stuff. So we don't have that same labour requirement, but we will have a labour requirement in terms of customer services. The innovation element probably comes more towards as our car club, which is still kind of very much a kind of high level thought at the moment. Is about how we get that to work, and how we get round the problems of all the return to base kind of models that are in place. So you collect the car here, the car goes back here, that's kind of it. We want like a kind of a cycle or a circle, so people can use it for going to 2 or 3 places, but we also need to have the cars in the right place at the right times to make sure that we can manage that. So there's certain elements we can do in terms of surge pricing, so we can make cars very, very cheap to get them to the right place at the right time, and then also increase prices to it when we move them. But that's where the biggest thought process, because nobody can really seem to get this one-way travel thing working properly, and we're going to try and do that. So that's where in terms of our innovation challenge, that's where it lies.
Great. That's fantastic. So Piers, I think you were kind of suggesting the one app, the Mass app, to rule them all, to sort of integrate some of these transportation services. Is that something you're actively involved in, or just anticipate happening?
Yeah, it's not been something that we've spent a lot of time on yet, but we've just started. Kind of our focus was on getting some service up and running, and now our focus is starting to move to actually integrating that with other providers. I think that's something that depends a lot on the ecosystem. So it's not something where we'll go it alone and suddenly solve for every journey. I think that's something where you really value, whether it's a local bike hire scheme or local taxis, or for instance, for a disabled person, having a taxi that can take a wheelchair off the bus that can also take a wheelchair, and that they actually know it can take a wheelchair. It won't be switched over with a vehicle that can't take it at the last minute, and then they'll be left on the side of the road. So all of this stuff, I think that's one of the big things we're relying on happening to 2030 is the ecosystem developing along with us. And I don't think it's changed fast enough over the last 10, 20 years. There's been a lot of sort of ideas out there, but for many people, there hasn't been a big change in how they get around. They still commute to work by car. They still don't have great bus services in their town or whatever. They don't feel many of these benefits. And there's been some changes, but I definitely think the pace needs to accelerate.
Good. So we're just running out a little bit of time here, but I thought I might jump on one question from the audience here, in addition to the others, that is around data sharing. The UK government has basically said they're going to put legislation in place making transport mobility providers share the data and put it back in the hands of the users and the owners. I don't know if this is something that you're currently dealing with, or I don't know if do you have any thoughts or opinions around that? Maybe Piers.
Yeah, so I kind of, coming from a background in fintech, a big thing that changed the industry there was open banking, which was a similar initiative, but for the banks, forcing the banks to make the data from your bank account available to others with your permission. And that was mandated by the UK, and it's actually starting to take off now. It's been a big part in allowing non-banks to do COVID lending to businesses, because they can actually understand the business, because they can see the data inside the business. And I think the transport industry would benefit from something similar. I think we're completely happy to make APIs available for our data. I think the other thing you find here is that too many times mobility as a service things have started as a partnership between kind of two companies that then fizzles out and nothing happens with it. And it takes kind of a year or two to set that partnership up. And it's much better to have a kind of open ecosystem where anyone can work with anyone. To give you an example, we're really keen to integrate with Edinburgh Transport, allow people to switch straight onto a tram or onto a bus. But there's no way we can sell a tram ticket. We would love to be able to sell a tram ticket and integrate that. We just can't do it. We've tried contacting Edinburgh Trams. We've not yet got through to the right person. And hopefully we'll get this set up eventually, but that will take it's a year since we first contacted them now. That's not how you're going to get rapid change. If you want rapid change, you really need to have these kind of open standards that allow anyone to use the data and do innovative stuff with it.
Good. I'm just going to jump on. I ask you, Gavin, next. Based upon the same thing. I mean, are you coming across any agencies or organizations that really want the type of data you're collecting? Is there kind of been interest in that from a mobility perspective or otherwise?
Yeah, totally. I can't tell you who, but I just had a conversation yesterday where the massive company I was chatting to was saying, well, yeah, wouldn't it be good, in inverted commas, wouldn't it be good if a disabled person said, I need this, this, and this, and this, and we know that disabled people, if they get better service, are prepared to give you information. We know that if you're a guide dog owner or you're a wheelchair user, they want you to know that before you go there. They were looking at this company that was talking to us and saying, well, yeah, we could use your kit to actually ensure that there was this universal data that meant when somebody booked on a ferry, when they got met at the taxi at the other end of the journey, that the taxi driver would have access to the same information and the same information on how to interact with that person. So there was a consistency in how they were interacted with through the entire journey. And we're doing that. We're working, we're just about to launch a web portal. We've been an app up until now, but we're going to be a web app, which you wouldn't recognize any difference, except that people can input their data into the actual partner, the venue they're going to, or planning to go to. If they're saying, I want to go to a particular bank, they go on there, they input their data, and that then data is shared. So the potential for that is ginormous. I mean, absolutely massive. That data on how to provide services for disabled people is, well, it's phenomenal. 8 trillion a year, I think I mentioned.
Great, yeah. So it sounds like they're only too happy to do that if it improves their experience. Yeah. Great. So Eifion, I don't know, you're in sort of early days of generating this type of data. Have you been giving it any consideration to date? Something that's top of your mind just yet?
Well, our IT provider, when I was having a meeting with them last week, they actually said the data that we'd be producing from this will be a commodity, and it was something that I'd never kind of thought about before. And I was like, well, how is that? And he said, well, people would be really interesting to see exactly how it works, how many kind of green kilometers or miles have been traveled rather than dirty miles. And I was blown away. So I think the sharing of all this information, and also just to streamline exactly how travel is done in the UK I think is very, very important. When Pierce was talking, I remember describing to somebody in Japan how British trains work, and I said, yeah, about how much you don't know how much the train ticket's going to cost, and there might be 3 or 4 differences. He actually thought I was taking the mick. And he went home that night and then did the research on it and came back and said, I really must apologize. I can't believe how crazy your train system is, because I've been singing the praises of, even though that I can't speak Japanese, I can't read Japanese, any of that. I could travel around Japan with total confidence that I was going to get on the right train, the right bus, or there'd be a taxi at the end, and I'd always be able to get to where I needed to go. Whereas I don't have that confidence when I turn up at a UK train station and trying to work out where exactly you've got to be. And it's not very user friendly for anybody. So I do think that the information that we will all be producing to be put into the mix to actually streamline the whole kind of ticketing process or onboarding process, I think is key to the future of kind of mobility. People want simple solutions, not complicated ones.
Yeah, it's all about making life easier at the end of the day. Thank you very much. So unfortunately, we are out of time for this panel. It's been a fantastic discussion. I really appreciate you all being here. Piers Glennie at Ember, Gavin Neat at Neatebox, and Eifion Roberts at Bounc-e. I keep calling it Bounc-e. You've got the E on the end there. So yeah, I was going to say, everyone give him a round of applause, but in this day and age, it doesn't really work out. Excellent. Thank you very much. So next up,